The sirens still echoed when I feel the fear take over my body. It was not a moment in the fast. It was something that came in a slow, heavy, as if the air had become thicker than all at once. My father was on the ground. He was surrounded by people who I have known since I was a child. But at the time there didn't seem to recognize it, neither with me, nor will it. There were no screams. There was no confusion. Only a silence, a strange, almost respectful, as if they knew what would happen. It was then that I began to understand it. Before any court, before any other ruling official, he was not charged with anything. He was condemned by the city. I have tried to search for some sort of logic at fault for anything that you do that as a mistake. But there was an error. There was a collective decision-making, the invisible, taken long before that night. As I watched, I realized that it wasn't just my father who was being carried away. It was everything I was carrying, all of which I still believed that I could save you. If you've ever felt that kind of tightness in your chest, you know that, don't you forget it? And maybe that's why you keep listening to it. Because this story is not just about fairness. It's about what happens when a city decides who is worthy to live on. When he came out, the man in whom they trusted, the sheriff who had the command in silent running, I felt something break inside of me. I have not sought for words. I looked for a sign. A look, a gesture, or in anything. That is to say, that it still couldn't be stopped. There was nothing. Only the quiet of the firm is calculated, as if he was exactly where he was supposed to be. At that moment, I realized that there are some choices you don't need to be spoken out loud in order to be permanent. What would it be? My dad would go down, and I would have to deal with the consequences. In the trial, it came way too fast, almost as a formality tired. There was no anger. There has not been a surprise. The people were in attendance as an audience, something necessary, something that needs to be done so that the city will continue to work. When it's all finished, no one said. And that was the one that scared me, because it was clear that it was not a matter of revenge or hate explicit. It was something much deeper, colder. In this city, not to punish crime. She will punish anyone who breaches the agreements, which no one admits that there are everyone has been waiting for me to be gone. I could feel it in every single conversation dropped, and in each of the suggestions said that taken care of. There were those who said that it was best to start over in the distance, as if it were that simple to delete a lifetime. But I did, and getting changed. Suddenly, each and every step of mine seemed to be a challenge, as each of the presence of mine was a reminder of the hassle of a story that they wanted to quit too soon. While I was there, nothing would really be solved. What no one knew was that there was something even more dangerous to me and keeping you there. My love for Robert. He had not stopped. He was still there, hidden, suppressed, full of guilt. During the day, we were strangers, separated by an abyss, is invisible. In the night, out of sight of the town, there was still a silence that is shared, the hands that had the promises that can't be spoken of. Love, there was a level of comfort. It was a risk. And with each look crisscrossed the street and made the risk seem to be more expensive. Over time, I realized that the city didn't need to acknowledge it out loud. It was enough to notice. It was enough to close himself off. The doors, which were once open, they began to close slowly, as if someone was pressing the siege of the few. And the more I tried to understand what was behind much of the condemnation of my dad, I felt that the story was layered, which they didn't want to see it. Perhaps you already knew it too, because there is nothing there. It was simple to do. And the one that started that night did not end with the cuffs. It was only the beginning of something that was still far away from themselves fully. As I say all this, I know I'm not alone. Don't let the stories, as they do not belong to a single city or a single person. They are the same in different places, with different faces, but always leave you with the same brand name. Maybe, at some point in your life, you will also have to have the sense that the weight of the trial, in silence. Realizing that the people have decided to something about you you never asked for their release. If this has happened, leave it here in the comments. No need to explain too much. Sometimes it is only to say, I understand. I already create a connection to you. Everything changes. I am telling you because I believe that when these stories are listened to, they lose some of the power to hurt you. And when you say, when you react, when you join, but this story is no longer my own, it comes into existence between you and us. At some point in this story, you have touched it and squeezed in there as long as you heard it. A simple like, that already helps more than it may seem. It's not about the numbers than a week. It's about to make that sort of fact to reach out to more people who need to feel less alone. And if you feel like you want to keep me, you want to keep up with this kind of story up to the end. If you subscribe to the channel, it is almost as quiet between us. That is to say that the matter is that these narratives, they deserve to continue to be told even when it is uncomfortable. Even when they injured a lot of people would prefer to pretend it doesn't exist. Each sign is a sign to you that it is worth it to move ahead, to go deeper, to go beyond the surface. I promise I'll keep this video in earnest, with no shortcuts, easy, with no end and comfortable too. What else is more intense, sensitive, and, in some ways, even more dangerous? Because here are some truths begin to come closer to the surface, and not everyone is ready to deal with them. When he first appeared, it was as if the sounds of the sirens had fallen to only do I listen to silence him. That was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something heavy. It's a sort of decision-making. I've looked into the eyes of him with a single sign of sympathy, for any trace of the human said, "This is wrong." But what I found was a look of firm. It's hard to just professional. He looked as if he was trying to protect me and kill me at the same time. And that confused me in a way I had never experienced before, because it is a part of me wanted to run up to him, and the other part wanted to scream for him not to come near, as if the proximity of him, you could decry my father. People around you are settled when he came in. You see, when someone comes in and changes the energy of the place, the city relied on it as if it were the very proof that it's all there. It was just that it was all for a reason. And Robert knew it. He didn't even need to raise his voice. The costume, the post, the name, everything about him was a kind of authority that you do not need to be explained. It was at that moment that I began to understand it in the first cabinet of that night. It didn't matter what I thought. It didn't matter what I feel. The collective perception had already been cast. And the truth hidden. It is always dangerous when everybody swear they are looking at the reality. I remember having the thought, just for a second, that maybe he was the only one who can stop it. But when our eyes crossed, I felt like a suit of invisible being closed without a word. What would it be? My dad would go down, and I would have to choose from. It was not a choice of cleanup. It was not a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between surviving and keeping my dignity. In between running away and accept that, if I was you, I would be overwhelmed by the city, which has a long memory, and forgiveness and short. The mindset was simple. If you are connected to the guilty party turns into a part of the blame, even though you have done nothing about it. I could have sworn I saw a hint of regret on his face from his view. At a fraction of a second, he almost allowed himself to be alone with a man, not a sheriff. But it's restored quickly, as one who had already made decisions both before and couldn't get back on. And that's when the shock came from the fact. I've noticed that Robert wasn't winging it. Nothing at that moment was unscripted. That was the script. He had the order. He had a straight silent, which everyone seemed to know except for me. The transformation that started there, it was not just my father being taken away, it was my own. Because when you see someone you love choose from in the silence, you won't be the same person. I've tried to get closer, but the two men grabbed me with kindness, as if I were fragile, as if I didn't have the right or to my own world. "It's okay, Sophia," someone said to me, and hear my name in that way, in that scene. It made me feel a sense of humiliation that burned him from the inside out. I looked at Robert again, waiting for him to respond, and that he might send them forth to me and hold it to break at least one rule. He just held his gaze and, with a minimal movement of the head, to me, something no one else would have heard it. "Don't do it. Not here, not now. As if the gesture I could have a bigger impact than I thought it would be, as if I had been seen by the eyes, which I hadn't even noticed. And what's worse is that it was the right one. I was in the city. I measured. He was not curious about it. It was an assessment. As if each and every person there, he was holding a piece of that night, so use the later. I have started to notice the small details. Those details are what we notice when, in reality, is sharp. The women pressed the bag against his chest when he saw me, in the way of a man turned his face, not feeling the pressure with which the group went across the street to get away from me. They were picking sides, without saying a word. And when a community does this, she does not turn back on with ease. It was in this climate that I have heard of my father, taking a deep breath, as if he was embracing it. And I went through like a knife. He did not fight. It is not pleaded. He did not try to explain. He only raised his eyes to me. And in that look, there was a message that I do not know how to decipher them in time. But I chased after it. I remember thinking, why is he so quiet? For that, he's going to give up so quickly. And at the same time, it's a part of me was afraid of the answer. Because sometimes we prefer the pain that is simple, is the pain of believing that it was unfair, that the pain is too complex to figure out, that there is a reason why all the more somber by the back of what is going on. I wanted to hate you, Robert, at that very moment. I wanted to turn the anger into something that's easy to carry. But the truth is that I knew the man was aware of the gesture, the way he was when he was caught between duty and desire. And I saw the conflict there. Only that the conflict doesn't save anyone. The conflict did not prevent the handcuffs. The conflict doesn't change the opinion of the city as a whole. He was in the house, and I'm the daughter of the man that they had already decided to destroy it. This was the logic that a cruel place. For the rest, it was a feeling of trying to survive in a system that does not have space for the sentiment. And it was there, in my father's being put in the car, and the peace and quiet of Robert's heavier than any of the charges. I realized that my next decision would only be on the subject of justice. They would be about survival, about the mind. How far would I go to find out what was hidden behind that sentence? Because one thing was clear, too much to ignore. It wasn't just a case in point. It was a message for you. And in a way, I felt that this message was for me. And that I hadn't even seen the half of what was going on underneath that surface. Later that night, I went into a sort of trance by the stranger that is. The days were still going on, but nothing seemed to be real, for real. I would go up to the house, open the faucet, washing your face, trying to sleep. And even then, the sound of the handcuffs, she seemed always to be there, hitting the back of my head. I held it was not just what they did to my father. It was easy. The speed with which it all fell into place, as if the entire city had already rehearsed this scene 1,000 times over. And when the trial finally came to, I was still carrying a New Hope Boba Fett. No, that he would be found not guilty, but at least there'd be a fight. The noise, the fighting. Some of the humankind. I was wrong. The court seemed to be colder than normal, not because of the temperature, but because of the weather. There was no one in suspense. Dramatic people think. Nothing for us, nothing is in revolt, and nothing of what is being protested. It was like watching a machine is up and running. A stream of clean, clear, almost elegant in so many lives. My father came in and went out, as if it were a minor detail. I have to remember to pick up on small things. The way he held the papers up, the sound of the dry stamp of the looks, it diverted before it to face me. It was a weight behind the scenes, as if the party is an important function because it had happened to you out there, in a closed room, and in the conversations that I'd never hear. When the court spoke of the sentence, I felt my body react to it before on the back of my mind. A vacuum in the stomach, cold hands, and the heart beating in the wrong. And then comes the worst. No one ever said, no one cheered. No one made a face of victory. There was no satisfaction of the obvious things you would expect from the one who did it justice. The people breathed, as it were, to confirm that the world was still in place. And it gave me a sense of awe. which I cannot explain to you all the way through because I realized that it wasn't the anger that drove the city. It was something far more dangerous, a consensus. I looked around, trying to find a face that seemed to upset you, someone to show them a crack at certain decisions. I found the silence. There was a silence educated, social, and almost civilized. The people rose up and Jadaram jackets, grabbed the bags and went out, as if it had been a correction is required, an adjustment of the order. As if my dad was a screw loose and had to be turned into the structure of the desert. And from that point on, the word ultimate has gained a new meaning for me. The definitive wasn't worth it. A definitive era on the job. My father was taken away, as if he had never been to that city. How many years of it in there, and the stories, well known, and that it has built up. All of it could be wiped away with a subscription. I saw him, he passed by me, with friends, and he didn't ask for help, it is not pleaded. Have not tried to comfort me. He just looked at me in a way that seemed to mix carefully, and fired. And I've always felt that there was a truth hidden in there, hanging from that look, the one thing that he couldn't say it out loud. The kind of thing that is changing the mindset of someone else's forever. Because it forces you to see that some of the structures collapse with the arguments. Outside, the sun was high, and that makes me angry. It seemed like a mistake in the world is to become so, of course. My life collapsed. I've heard bits and pieces of the conversation. Nothing is straightforward, nothing to express. The comments about moving forward on what had to be done. And now it's going to be okay. And I just realized that the trial was not about race, not about morality. I had been on hold for a covenant of the invisible One Piece. It is a compact that the entire world understands. No need to name it. An unwritten set of rules that define who may be here, and with dignity, and who is going to be reduced to being just one example. It was then that my transformation has begun for real. The transformation is beautiful. The people are fond of telling then how to overcome it. It was a transformation from an ugly one, silently, on the inside. The feeling that I had to choose I would be there. So that a person who accepts the narrative is all ready and see if you can survive in the world. Or is it someone that you decided to look for a corner in the dark, even if it has an impact on what I was not able to be measured? Because I was already starting to feel the weight of the consequences of not having done it at all. The looks in the street, they were the longest. All the doors were closed. In my name, he started to feel different in the mouth of the people. And the strange thing is that I've also started to wonder to myself how the city has been trying to convince me that I deserve to feel ashamed of. This is the one thing that almost no one talks about, when the environment is the judge in the silence. You get to do all the work, so he is on the inside. Do you wonder if you should have gone away? If you should have done something? If you would have to cut out all the links on that story? But each time the question has appeared, and I remember the way it all went to fast, clean, rest, embedded to the other. And I felt like I was in a gear higher. There's a journey to the hidden happening behind the official version. I looked Robert in the middle of that, but he wasn't next to me. I only saw him from a distance, closer to the door, with the attitude of the one who owned the place. And for a second, I thought that perhaps it would also be stuck in the same covenant, but on the inside. This idea is not me. Brought a breath of fresh air. He brought in another kind of trouble. Because even he, with all the authority that he has, he could not break the silence. So what exactly? She was propping up the city. I walked away from the court with the feeling that I was going through a line that is invisible. Behind me, my father had vanished from the world as if it were to be deleted. On the front, and I had a way of making it, I still don't know name. And no matter how much I tried to pretend that it was just a sentence, and I knew that it was only the first revelation. The first layer is stripped off of a story that it was far from over. Because of the covenant of the invisible, when it is being threatened, it is not only about the destruction of a person. He is always in charge anymore. After your trial, the question is no longer whether I would go away. The question came to be, when you want. All the bags appeared ready, and I want to just make them neat. Clothes folded up, The documents are separated, as if it's a part of me had accepted that the output automatically. Almost logical. Calls started coming from far-flung places. Messages that are loaded with all the good intentions of people offering shelter. A fresh start, not remembering. It all came packaged in the same manner as the silent. Getting out was the best and safest way to survive. Go, even though it meant to relieve the city from me uncomfortable, meant to close the deal. But I did. And this is the decision that is on the inside seemed to be simple. It had an immediate impact on the outside world. Be not interpreted as courage or imagination. It was seen as a provocation. How to find out if my stay were to be a living reminder of something that they want to delete it. I figured it's fast. It's not by words, but by the subtle changes too much to be ignored. The way that people have started to measure my steps. How the conversation came up when I was in the one place. Your attention to the exaggerated my movements, as if every action of my being recorded for future use. Walking through the streets, she was a different experience. There were no direct threats of violence. There were no clashes in the marketplace. It was the worst. He was vigilant. Surveillance of trained, organized, almost invisible. Every breath seemed to carry a greater significance than it should be. I felt like I needed to justify my existence all the time, even with no one to ask for any explanation. The city doesn't want to talk about. She just watched him, waiting for the discomfort to do the work yourself. This is one of the most effective strategies to control. Make sure that the person will start to ask questions until you decide to go away on its own. In a few moments, I almost relented, not through fear, but through the exhaustion, emotional. There is a little where to silent to be constantly reminded that you are no longer welcome, where it messes with your mind, and with the way in which you get to see it. I began to wonder if this stay was proud of disguise, and if I were to pay a price that is too high for something that has already been lost. It's just that, while at the same time, each call is represented as an attempt to end the story too soon. I had already understood that nothing in it was the rapid chance. The more upset he was to realize that my mere presence was keeping an open wound. While I was there, in the narrative, the official will never be completely clean. I was a vivid reminder that someone else had been cleared to maintain a compact, invisible peace, and of pacts, and so don't like witnesses. They are in need of quiet. The forgotten walk away. Stick it meant to break the flow is comfortable with. Meant to force the city to live with something that she would rather push it under the rug. With the passage of time, the small decisions that have started to gain a huge weight where I came in. The one I was talking about. How long have I lived in such a place? It all seemed to have an impact will not be seen. I noticed the looks of it if you went through after you watch me. Comment susherados that I couldn't quite hear it, but you feel it. It was as if I were walking around the inside of the board, where the rules have been explained to you, but the penalties were the same as well. And this contributed to a transformation of the internal slow and subtle, but profound. At the same time, there was something in me that refused to come out. It wasn't just imagination. It was the feeling to go away at that moment. Would you accept an incomplete version of the truth? Would you agree that that's all that happened? It could be resolved at a distance. I had already learned that some of the stories, when they are left behind it's too early, go back to the ways a lot worse after that. Getting in was uncomfortable, dangerous, even. But it was also a way of keeping my eyes open for a behind the scenes that they didn't want to reveal it. I began to understand that the city was just waiting for me to leave. She was testing how long I could stand. Where would it go with my strength? If I was going to break down on its own, or if you need to push it a little bit more. This is the type of gameplay is not the case in plain text. It is built on daily life and the small attendants at the doors that fail to open. The opportunities that the crime could not be fully explained. And yet, I was still there. The feeling that each and every day added to the tension of something that you didn't have a name. Because as long as I remained there, and the story was still incomplete, and the longer I stayed, the more obvious it became that his loneliness was not merely the last of my fathers, but for me, it could lead to in the future. I still don't know exactly what was about to happen, but I felt that in order to be previously activated in a sequence of movements, the quiet, the decisions being taken away from my eyes, and the truths of being reorganized under the covers. And it was, in some way, and I was pretty sure that the city would not be such a shame for a long time without reacting to it. What no one knew about it, and maybe it was just that which made him all the more dangerous. The fact was that I hadn't lost it's only for my father to go to that city. I had lost my right to love you be at peace, because with it all coming down, and that was between me and Robert, did not finish, don't waned, not turn to mind. He kept it there, alive, constant, almost reckless, as if it were the only thing that I didn't accept the rules of the place. And I know that to an outsider, this may seem absurd, even reckless. But the truth is that some of the connections did not disappear just because they have been undesirable. It will change the way hiding, breathing low, during the day, and the distance between the nodes was calculated. It was not the coldness and emotional, and it was a strategy. It was a mindset of the survival of what we have learned in a hard way. I saw him on the street, at the post office, in a meeting, fast, and always with that attitude firmly in his, as if his uniform was a suit of armor. He would greet people to address the problems. He had to order. And I was right there, going through all of this, as if there was nothing between us. I don't know any of the lines on the face of it. When he's tired, as if I didn't know the weight that it carries over in silence. The city is needed for this version of him. The man is right, and the just man, the man who does not shake. And at the same time, in the city, I needed my release too. The daughter of a convicted person, the remembrance of annoying in the way he should disappear. I could feel it every time someone would look at me and then looked at him, as if trying to measure something. As if there was a watch that he did not need evidence, only suspicion. It was only then that I realized one thing about guilt. It's not just about what you do. Many of the times, it's what other people decide who you are. And with our love and in that dynamic, it wasn't romantic and beautiful. It was, etc. It was almost a crime without a law, a breach of mind. At night, everything changed. Not in a way that was cinematic, but in a way that is quiet and the real one. The kind of change that only happens when no one is looking. Robert came in without a noise, without light, without notice. Sometimes, I just realized it's because of the breathing of the atmosphere seemed to fit in. I knew that he was close to it before they even see you. And when he was holding my hand, and it seemed as if the world was to have the shirt, I felt as if I couldn't remember who I was before all of this. It was weird because at the same time, it was comfort, it was a risk. With each encounter, it was a decision, and every decision had a significant impact. We never spoke out loud of what was going on, not because of lack of words, but also because of the words that make the real stuff too. And it's real too, right there, was very dangerous. Robert was looking at me as if to apologize for the things I couldn't change it. At times, I could see the anger in him, but not in an angry impulse. It was an angry word is directed to the inside, as if it were all the time fighting against a part of himself. I've realized it when he was making an effort to look as normal as he held on to what was expected of him. I was thinking about behind the scenes of his life, in a place mentally where he had to balance duty and reputation. And that's what it felt like for me. I wasn't innocent in this. I knew what he was doing. I knew that I could stay with him was a challenge for the city. He was holed up in a story that is all you wanted to delete. Only that there was actually a hidden form inside of me. I was not only pursue a forbidden love, and I was trying to figure out why it was so very menacing. Because if that was the only part of the novel, if it was just a secret affair, the city would have ignored it. But she was ignoring it. She watched him. She responded with silence, which seemed to be prepared for it. And I would say that the issue wasn't just a moral compass. It was a political one. It was quarter to the next. It was a party to that covenant, to recognize that I had already started to feel it. There were nights when Robert did not come, and it was the worst. Why? I wondered if it had been called, if anyone had noticed. and if something had happened to him. I was trying to control the thoughts and how to control thoughts that could change your reality. This is a change that no one talks about. Where you live can be found there, in your mind, becomes a field of surveillance as well. You get the measure of every detail, to anticipate every scenario, to provide for each of the risks. And yet the people followed him, because they had never really had that connection. That seemed to be the only part of the world that he was not lying to me. On one such night, he finally came out with a face is more gloomy than ever. It was not fatigue as common. It was as if he had just been told that he could not de-sober. He walked in, he looked around, as if even the walls and they could say what they would see. And then it came closer. When he took my hand, and it was not that great before. It was with urgency, as if the time had decreased. I've always felt that a decision had been taken outside of our control, that I could see. And when he tried to talk to him, he stopped in the middle of it, as if you were to choose each and every word for fear of opening a door that does not close after that. I did not ask for it right away, but my whole body was on high alert. Because I knew him, he was silent. It was the silence of one who is holding on to a revelation so as not to cause damage to a larger, even though the damage is already well on the way. And while I was looking at her eyes from him, I had the clear feeling that love is, in addition, etc., had become a trigger. The one sore spot that someone, somewhere, was getting ready to push. After a while, it became impossible to pretend that nothing had changed. The eyes were no longer a curiosity. Not a surprise, they had a trial. The trial is quiet, organized, almost to be disciplined. The conversation had stopped in the middle of the sentence when I first appeared, as if someone had tightened a kill. Smiles than ever before have all but disappeared, to be replaced by the expressions of neutral, the other to be a natural. Some of the people crossing the street when you see me, not afraid to express, but by choice. And the choices are repeated to create pattern. I don't want to hear any of the words to understand the message at the head of them. I was not only the daughter of one of the condemned man. I was a part of the error is, a part of the channel that they want to delete it. It started to affect me in a way that was deeper than I'd care to admit. It was not only a bit of social discomfort. It was a constant pressure and a feeling of being valued as if the gesture, I could confirm to him that I was ready. I began to measure my movements and choose where to get the estimate time. Not because someone else had gotten the tax directly, but because the environment is that when you decide to push to the outside without the use of force, it is a transformation in a slow, almost imperceptible, that it is shaping your mindset until you start to doubt yourself. The hardest part was to realize that even when he wasn't next to me, he was there in the every you look through. All the people knew it. You may not know exactly what it was between us, but they felt that something was out of place. And nothing bothers me more of a city than that which can't be said out loud, but you also can't be ignored. I felt the price for our love to grow day by day, not direct threats, but at a small loss, a service that is more of cold weather. For a call that never came, the one that was auto, and now it was accompanied by a second thought. There were times when I wondered whether Robert will also feel this is the side of him. If it is perceived in the eyes when I was walking alone, if I listened to the comments cut in half and you could feel the weight of the expectations. It was him, the man who had, and still I was under the impression that this order was beginning to be closer to him as well. I did not have to be visible, but the behind the scenes. Because when a city decides to secure a deal in the invisible, and she watches both, anyone who threatens them and those who may be hesitant, I began to understand that the isolation was not a side effect of that. It was a strategy. They didn't want to confront. They wanted to wear. They wanted me to feel tired, too much to keep it there. My decisions began to be driven by the desire for relief. It is not the search for truth. It's because when you act only to alleviate the immediate pain, it ends up delivering something much bigger. I felt like I was trying to push me to make quiet. I accept the blame, which they have attributed to them, or I will go away. In a few days, and I almost relented. Not because I agree with them, but at the psychological impact of being constantly reminded that you don't belong to you. But there was something inside of me refused to accept that version of the story. I knew what had happened to my father. It was only the visible part of a something much more complex. And as most of the city, I tried to pull away. The more clearly was that there were the revelations that they wouldn't like what I have achieved. Because no one else will react with so much care, and in the silence, something that has already been resolved. Robert and I rarely spoke about it directly, not because of lack of courage, but because the name of that weather would make it all the more real. However, I feel that each and every step of mine in the city echoed in some way in his life. It was as if we were connected to a constant voltage, an invisible line that resonated every time that someone watched him carefully to the other. Love like that is no longer just a feeling. He turned to a decision on the daily load of the consequences that went far beyond the two of us. I've got to pay attention to the details that we would otherwise go unnoticed. Those who watched with the others, those who go out to fast, those who seemed to be relieved when I didn't appear for a couple of days. These little signs, they formed a map of the silent, a kind of reading in parallel from the city. And the more I watched, the more I felt that I was getting closer to something that you didn't have a name, but he had no weight. A truth is hidden, which would explain not only the fate of my father, but the discomfort of the collective with my presence. Because if I were to be no more than a memory to be sad, they would have gone ahead. But I used to be a presence. And in your presence, there was a risk. As long as I continued walking down those streets, looking you in the eyes of the people. To sustain the rest of my story, the covenant of the unseen continues to be tested. And of pacts, and so do not want to be tested for a long time without reacting to it. You may already have a sense for something like that. This is the moment when you realize that the silence around longer than any of the prosecutions open. If this has happened to you, write it here in the comments. In a single sentence that represents this sentiment, like the silence hurts. At times, you acknowledge that helps you to understand that the stories are not so much individual as much as it seems to be. It was, after all, that's the first big reveal has begun to form. It is not as a big shock immediately, but as the cracks slowly what I thought I understood it. I was sitting all alone, trying to rearrange the thoughts that don't fit in, when something hit me hard. My father, he never tried to hold on to. The more I revisitava each and every detail of it, the more it became clear. He has not fought with the lawyer. He did not insist on the alternate versions of each other, did not fight for sport. On the contrary, he rejected the evidence that would, at a minimum, to reduce the sentence. He asked to which such witnesses will not be called, chose silence as to any person, it would have been said. At first, this realization I turned. It seemed abandoned. It seemed like a coward. He looked as if he had given up on me, along with his or her freedom. But as I began to gather the pieces, the anger has given way to something more manageable, a correctly exposed. He wasn't defending themselves because they couldn't make it. Or, heck, why not to do? It was as if he had assumed a role within a larger sprocket. A role that required you to sacrifice for the other parts to continue working without being exposed to. This perception has completely changed my mind. The story stopped being about the guilt of the individual and went on to be on the protection of the collective. My father did not fall because it was the only one in the wrong. He fell because someone else needed it to fall. Because if it were to resist, and if urged him, therefore, too, the things that were buried a long time ago that could come to the fore. The things that do not entail just one person, but to the decisions of old, the agreements are silent, behind the scenes, which they held in the same city. And when I accepted it, I felt the impact of the physical almost like gasping for air. Because the price of stability, both of them had been completely destroyed in the human history. I started to remember all of the sentences from the eyes of strangers, in the moments in which my father seemed to carry a weight that I've never been able to name, the little warnings in the guise of advice. Silence too long, when some names that popped up. All of those things, which before had seemed irrelevant, and started making more sense. It was as if he had spent those years by taking tough decisions in order to keep things out of reach, believing that it would protect us. And in the end, the guard demanded that it be deleted. The question that arose in me did not leave me more alone. Who was actually protecting you as you slay my father? Because cities don't do that kind of thing, by the way. Not willing to sacrifice for someone without a reason is structural. There is a fine balance to be maintained, a fact hidden that needs to stay buried to the surface to keep looking clean. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the trial was only the visible part of a far more ancient. This revelation has changed the way I looked at Robert. In the silence, it started to gain a new meaning. Maybe it wasn't just ignore it. You may be aware. Maybe he knew more than he could admit, caught between the charge of the decisions that had been taken before he arrived, and the inability to break down an entire system without causing it to collapse. This has not made it all acceptable, but we made it all the more complex. And in other words, this is something that the city did not like to discuss it in public. I felt the fear, but not fear plain in the past. It was a fear more sophisticated, more measured. The fear of being starting out on a journey of no return, in which each individual congregation would pull the other, and each and every answer, to open up new questions. Because of my father, who had agreed to drop, to protect to something bigger. That meant that the covenant of the unseen, it was more fragile than it looked. And covenants, the fragile react when someone gets too close. At the same time, I came to understand what was in the garden. An internal transformation, which was not a comfortable one, but it was definite. I could no longer pretend that everything was all just bad luck, or injustice, the one-off event. There was intention to do so. He had a choice. There were decisions to be taken out of the spotlight. And like it or not, I was a part of this board. Not for the first choice, but the consequence of that. I began to understand who I needed to stay in the city. My silence seen, my love is forbiddance. Everything made sense within the logic bigger. It was as if each and every element in it is connected to something that has not yet been fully revealed. And that would explain why the mood was still heavy, so it looks as not alleviated, so that no one seemed to really be at peace after the conviction. The story was not finished. She had just been put down. As long as I was in these parts, sure, it started to take root. If anyone had to be destroyed in order to keep the secrets buried deep, these secrets were still there. And there were the people who were still walking around freely in the city and are protected by the same structure as that part of them is my father. This is an idea with me all the time, like a silent presence and to shape my decision-making. Setting the way I look, to listen, to interpret every action around you. And maybe that's what I keep telling all of this. Right here, without oversimplifying it, without the cut in the corner was uncomfortable. Some of the stories make sense only when they are accompanied by up to where they're going. If you feel that you want to keep me in this way, to keep track of these findings to the extent that they arise, it is worth to subscribe to the channel now. It's quick, direct, and to ensure that you're not going to miss out on what is still to come. Because from here on out things will start to move in a way that no one else was waiting in the wings. When this question has been creeping up the inside, I began to look at Robert in a whole new way. It was not only the life of the man that I was in the dead of night, not only to the weight of the sheriff, which I could see from afar during the day. It was a necessity for almost a physical understanding of where he is in this story. Because my father had fallen in order to protect something, then someone else in there I needed to find out exactly what is being protected. And I knew that Robert's long enough to know when he or she was carrying something that he could not speak. I have not had to face it straight away. I spent the day watching all the details. The way in which he avoided for certain names and the way that posture. It was when someone approached him too. As if the body were to react before your mind. It became a part of my transformation that I began to pay attention to the signals on Tiny. On the scenes, what no one comments on it. Because it is in such places that the truth tends to hide. And the more I watched, the more the light was on, which Robert didn't know. Don't like someone, you've heard the rumors. But as someone who has participated in it, even against the wishes of some of the gear that was already running ahead of me, on the same night in which I talked about, I didn't like. I did not have the energy to do so. I just said the name of my father, and I was waiting for a reaction from him. Robert took a second longer than it should to answer. The second was that. I watched the muscles of the jaw, it has become hard. I saw his eyes shift by instinct, and then I felt a stab wound. It was not confirmed by the words. It was confirmed by reflection. He knew that there was something wrong. I knew that if I had the layers, and yet he chose to stay. I don't know if there is pain. The most cruel of you to realize that someone you love has chosen the city before you. Because at that moment in time, I came to understand that his choice was not a neutral. It was a decision to have a direct impact on my life. He chose to serve. You have chosen the position which kept him protected within the covenant. It is invisible. Picked up the order becomes apparent that the city advocated for so true. I couldn't decide if it was fear, survival, or some kind of sacrifice that I was not aware of. When I told him that he knew Robert could not deny her, not to have tried to persuade me to the contrary, not to the theater, he just took a deep breath, as if he was holding the weight on his shoulders, and he asked a low, almost as the one who cries out in order not to lose control for me to not dig deeper into it. It was not a request, the authoritarian. It was a desperate request. And that has left me even more confused, because the despair doesn't agree with who you are comfortable with your decision. Despair is for those who feel stuck. I asked him why, and he didn't answer with an explanation. He answered with a silence says a lot more than a sentence. There was a silence filled with the consequences of that. He stepped closer, pressing his forehead in mine for a moment, and I felt like he wanted to say, but I just couldn't. Like the words, and once released, they may not be able to be collected. As if there was a limit to recognize that he was not allowed to go through. It was only then that I realized that his power as a sheriff, it was real. But it was the border, and someone greater than he used to draw on these boundaries. In my mind, that I was changing, turned out to be something else in that moment. I stopped by to see Robert as a man who could save me, or the man who betrayed me. I started to see him as someone who was a prisoner in the same way that I suffocate, but in another part of the board. He was on the inside, me on the outside. And the two of you pay a different price for the same city. This doesn't lessen the pain, but gave it a context. And in that context, it is dangerous because it opens the doors for us to not able to close it after you. I noticed how he had to choose his words carefully, as if each of them could be used against us. And I don't think that, for him, it was only a matter of reputation. It was a matter of life and death. It's just that, while at the same time, I felt like an angry, cold to grow up, because the survival of him and seemed to require that I remain in the dark. I would take up the narrative in place. I pretended that it didn't really matter. And I was already past the point where it gives the opportunity to act it out. It was a conversation short, but heavy. I didn't have to dig too deep to understand what he was trying to protect me from something in a particular way. It was not the general danger. It was someone else, anything, a line that I crossed. There would be no return. This was made clear when he said, in a voice almost failing, and that there were things in that city that never forgave and curiosity. And I shivered, more than to any direct threat, because it was exactly what I was feeling in the air ever since I got the judgment silent. It was not in contempt, it was the contention. When he left that night, I stopped, trying to rearrange everything. Robert did, yes, and the knife not only to know about that. He was realizing that he had chosen to be known, in spite of seeing the injustice in between, even if my dad had been used. And even then, he stayed there, taking up the post, which led to the order. It was only when I accepted the fact that it's more than I wanted to admit it. The man that I loved was arrested in the city as much as I did. And it was perhaps for this reason that it was so freaked out by the possibility of the one I see a picture of what was really behind it all. If at some point in your life, have you ever felt that someone else had asked for a no mess of something? Not because it was untrue, but because it was too dangerous. Write in the comments, in a single sentence, "He knew, that's it." This is the part that changes with all of you. And I want to understand is how many people have come to recognize that this kind of silence. After that conversation, I had to stop to wait for a direct attack. I don't think that the city didn't like that. She didn't need to raise your voice, don't want to point the finger. You do not want me to accuse him in public. It was something much worse. Something that eats away at the inside without leaving any visible marks. She stifled a slow pace. And the most frightening aspect is that, from the outside, it appeared to be normal. It seemed like just a coincidence, routine. Busy people, life is carrying on. I just stood there, feeling the air to slow down. The first was as small, almost pathetic. A service that will always work began on the have a problem just when I needed it. A simple request turned into bureaucracy. The endless. A place where I was answered with the birth went on to be an impersonal machine. Nothing that I can prove it to you. Nothing that I could deal with. That was the clever part of the game. There is not an enemy, of course, when it happens, as if it was a coincidence. And when you try to explain it to someone from the outside, you feel paranoid. This is perfect to mix in with the mindset of someone that is until she doubts of their own instincts. Then you came in the door coming to a close. Some of it literally, as a person who pretended not to hear it when I hit it, or the traders who were there with anything don't look at me. Others were the doors to the invisible opportunities that evaporate, calls that never came, the meetings were right, and came to be. It's better to leave it to another day. I could see my name, become a burden on the conversation. I've noticed when someone was trying to talk to me, but retired from the race at the last second. And it wasn't just disregard. He was scared. The fear of being too close to something that is in the city. She decided that it was contagious. The isolation became the rule with no one to prescribe. And this is what you get as a community punishment without a law. She doesn't kicked out formally. They are going to leave it alone until you go away on its own. But I did. And as I have been, and the siege had to push the other way. Not to me only, but for the things that I was trying to keep you alive. That was between me and Robert. Because while I was just the daughter of a convicted person, and I was a social problem. But when the city began to suspect that I had a connection with him, I became a threat. Not by the morality, cheap, and not by gossip typical, it was deeper than that. It was as if our relationship had a hierarchy culture. How to love someone on the inside, as long as I was on the outside would be crossing a line that no one should go through. And the covenant of the invisible accepts no middlemen. It was only then that love has ceased to be a shelter, and it turned into a resistance. Not a resistance hero, a beautiful, but with a quiet strength. Strain is calculated. In each encounter with it seemed to carry a sentence of invisible hanging in the air. As if the time had a limit. It is as if the walls would repeat what they had seen. We began to meet less often. It is not because of lack of desire, but by strategy. And even if we did, there was always the feeling that someone was a step back for a moment, that something had gone on behind the scenes as we tried to breath. He is also beginning to feel. I could see this in the way that he came, and I was looking around before I could touch it, as if he was checking if it was safe enough for him to be a human being for a few minutes. He was carrying a weight that is brand new, his attention that it was not working. It was as if he was being reminded all the time of this post it came with a price of, to obey in silence. And I felt that the more he tried to protect me, most of the cities pressing in on him in the siege, as if to say it's no use, we've decided. Little things that gave it the wrong way. I've started to notice a pattern of cruel, and all that could make it easier on my life. I was hard, and that's all they could to push me away and was convenient for you. It was as if someone was playing the variables in my daily life to be tired of my resistance to it. And this has had a huge impact, and we think that you can handle the big tragedy, But the one that breaks the truth is that it is the infinite in the small cruelties. One day at a time, one detail after another, until you start to feel the loneliness even when it is associated with. And then, in the middle of it, and our relationship continued. Maybe because it still is the only way to not be taken by storm. But I could no longer pretend that I was a romantic. It was a calculated risk. A risk that paid out in fear and in the silence of the nights awake, trying to anticipate what might go wrong. A hazard that was either simple gesture, a hand against the other, with a look that is longer than it should be, something that could have very real consequences. The further irony is that no one ever came to me, saying, "Stop." No one threatened him directly. The city was just pulling out of the ground, and slowly, like one who wants to see as far as you can stand to stay on his feet. And the more I do it, the more I came to understand that this wasn't meant for me to destroy them at once. It was for me to bend. I do agree. Make me gentle in the face of the covenant of the unseen. But this pressure has also made me time to understand what was in the garden. I began to understand that if you were suffocating as it was, because there was something that they didn't want to survive, and maybe it wasn't just in love. Maybe that's just how this love could be on the bridge, which he created between the two sides. That is, they should not touch each other. This idea was a nagging question in my head, if it fits in with everything that I had ever seen, and that Robert tried to stop me from digging. And at that point, I was beginning to feel that the city was preparing for the next move, with the same patience and cruel than ever. Once you realize that the city was in the suffocating slowly, and I had to face up to the one person who seemed to have seen the game get too far ahead of myself. I went to visit my father for the hope of an acquittal, because it had already been stripped of our history, but by the need for meaning. I want to listen to something that it should not be filtered out, for fear of, for the sake of convenience, or because of this silence, the group that was all in a fog. On the way up, there seemed to be a ritual of a stranger. With each mile, I thought I was crossing the border invisible. And it's going to direct you to the place where the truths that often get stored. The living room had one light in the cold. They don't accept anyone else. The kind of atmosphere that reminds you of the time you're not there to talk. You're there to comply with the rule. When he was on the other side of the glass, and I felt like a shock to the quiet. My father seemed to be less, not physically, but as if they had reduced the space for it in the world. Still, there was something in his eyes that makes me even more annoyed. He did not look at me. He seemed to be careful, as if he was waiting for the right moment to say something to you that had to be uttered without being heard by anyone who's not supposed to. I touched your hand on the glass, and he did the same thing. So much as a hint that you don't touch it with a cruelty that I don't want anyone else. And he was right there with palms, and a silence fell heavy between us. He spoke a phrase that still resonates within me, as if it had been written in the flesh. They didn't cop me on to me, shut up. I took to stay here. He said it without anger, without drama, and with a quiet, almost sad, as if she was confirming that a strategy for the former, which finally made it to the final round. I stopped trying to process it, because by then I had to stay in the city. It was a judgment on my part. Stubborn, tough, maybe even some kind of courage. But when he said that, my sense has turned upside down. Suddenly, my presence didn't seem very free. It seemed like a perfect fit within the larger game. And I have felt a huge impact, not just emotionally, but mentally. As for my mind, I needed to reorganize in order to fit into a reality in which I was less of a player and more of a part. I asked him what he wanted to say. I maintain, he said, and he just squeezed my fingers on the glass, as if it was asking you to be calm. He doesn't talk a lot, and he knew it. The one place she had heard, she had eyes, and had behind the scenes. And even then, he continued, choosing the words carefully. He said that they were too powerful to accept that I have to leave now. We would rather see me in a close by, in control, which is surrounded by the most of small punishments on the loose somewhere in the distance, with the space to think and to speak. It was only when I understood that it is the most cruel of the city, not just wanted to punish the father. I wanted to manage that came after it. I wanted to control the narrative, including my reaction to it. And the control of a person, it does not require currents of the time. Sometimes you just have to surround, to choke, to make it move from the inside of a runner who is invisible. My father looked at me as if to ask for an excuse, such as it was recognized that the price that he paid was not just for him. It was for me as well. And this realization has caused a transformation in me that I didn't know if she wanted to accept it. I've tried to pull out details, the names, the reasons for it, but he deflected. Not because they didn't want to talk about, but because there was a limit. I realized that the truth is hidden. Which he wore was too big for the space that was much too big for one's phone that was much too big for any of the ordinary. And yet, he gave me enough to turn on an alert is final. I was being held in the city as part of its strategy, as if my presence would be required for something to support it. Or that's what it would be turned on at just the right time. And then he said something that reminded me immediately of Robert. Do not directly by name, but by logic. He told me that I needed to take care of it. I'd make a point of protecting you. Because of what it could turn into a weapon to be used against me, I felt my stomach curdling. Because, at that moment, the measure of our love is no longer just a risk and went on to be the target. If the city was moving the pieces with so much patience, I was pressing the siege with no leaving a trace. It's because you waited for the right moment to use what I valued as a driver. It was only then that I realized that my relationship with Robert, it was not a secret for any inconvenience. It was a vulnerability to see. It was the kind of thing that you could explore, to me, bend to me, to make you obey. I will keep the inside of the corridor. It is invisible. And I hated myself for it for a second, because I felt scared of it, because the love was not supposed to be weak. Only there, in that city, and all of it could be turned into an instrument. Even the feelings. When the visit ended, I didn't want to drop your hand on the glass. My father, too. But the guards did not need to be aggressive. They all just waited it out, as if they thought that the control was designed to. I walked out of there with a head full, a heavy heart and a clear and bitter. My residence was not a simple act. It was a part of the game that I was still learning how to see. And then, as I walked back, I could only think of one thing, and that if they remained here, they were expecting something from me. And I was starting to feel that something had to do with the love that you and I are still trying to save him. Now, the love is still there. Not in the way that I've dreamed of a day there's a light, or a promise of the future. It is hidden, pressed between the hard choices, and the silence too long. There's a living, but it hurts. It hurts because it needs to be restrained, measured, which is protected from the looks of it they do not forgive. My dad is definitely doomed, far away from the world they knew, and paying for the decisions that they have never been just for him. Robert's remains, such as his taking up the same space, and, as always, to upholding an order that appears to be intact on the outside, but I do know that it is weak on the inside. And I'm still here, breathing the same air, heavy duty, walking down the same streets that pretend to be normal as calculated in every step of mine. None of them is casual. For each position, for each absence, each resident is a part of a larger drawing that I'm still trying to figure out. I wake up every day with the feeling that I'm being seen. This is by no means open, but enough for me to never forget where I was. The city watches in silence, as the one who is waiting for the right moment. And when the city observes, too, is a curiosity. It's the anticipation. It's a calculation. It is a preparation for something that has not yet proved to be completed. The strange thing is that, in spite of everything, there is a routine that is apparent. People to follow on with their lives all the time, and the same faces appear in the same place. It's just that, back on that surface and organized. I feel a constant tension, as if something was being kept under control with an effort, too. Structures that require too much effort to keep them standing up tend to collapse in a violent way when someone gets it wrong all the time or a measurement. That perception is changing the mindset of any of them. You will observe more and talk less. To think about each and every decision, a simple one. For the love of you I am living now is not a shelter. It is to this risk. A risk that I have because you give it up would mean to accept that the game is exactly as it was designed for me. And at the same time, I know that this is love. This is the most vulnerable point of my story. In the city, you know it as well. Perhaps this is why the silence has become more dense, more alert, as if he was waiting for me to escort Agassi on her own. Love, here, turned out to be an act of resistance, whisper quiet, but it is also a standing invitation to danger. There are days that I feel like I'm pretty close to something important, like a truth hidden. She was about to cross over the surface. On the other, it would seem that everything is stationary, that is contained in the forces. I was waiting for the right time to move on. This variation is tiring, but it will also keep my senses on the alert. Because there is nothing that has happened so far has been the end of it. It was to prepare. It was fitting. It was the positioning of the pieces. And I learned it as hard as possible. Which is when a lot of pieces to get a lot of time in the same way as someone who is waiting for the right moment to push them out. I am not here because I believe in happy endings that are easy, but because they leaving now would mean missing out on a chance to understand what is really at stake, the city says. Robert continues, my father paid the price. And I just keep walking in between all of this, with the feeling that the story has not yet shown his face is more bleak. If you've come this far, it's because of something in this story you touched on the truth. Maybe not the specifics, but the sense that quiet. Those decisions were difficult. This is the kind of love that will charge you a price that is too high. If you do the same for you, if you subscribe to the channel to continue with content as well as told in no time, and without you to simplify what is complex, it's hard to shallow. I'm also going to enjoy it a lot to read that's made for you. Leave a comment telling us which one you have marked the end of the story, even as you played with the choices that have appeared along the way. This trade-off makes no difference. And if at any point you feel that you have created a connection to a like, it helps to keep this space alive and to bring this kind of storytelling further. There's a video right here on the side that complements all of that, which we discussed today, clicks, and still am there.